Welcome back to Strange Stories with the Seeker and the Skeptic. Today we have with us Julie Yankowski. Julie and I worked together at a children's mental health clinic back when we both lived in New York, but we have both moved to warmer climates since then. Julie is a holistic nurse practitioner with a lot of experience in the mental health field, and she has a really beautiful story to share with us today. So thank you for being here, Julie.
Yes, of course. Thank you for having me, Brittany. Hi, Jonathan.
Absolutely. Absolutely. We're very happy to have you. Tell us a little bit about like what it means to be a holistic nurse practitioner.
Yeah, I have always wanted to practice more holistically. I feel like I always did practice holistically, but didn't have that board certification. So that's what I was kind of looking for. And so about a year ago, I applied to get the board certification exam and was accepted into it. And so I think, and I passed the exam.
Woohoo!
So yeah, it was an intensive exam. It was probably over 3 hours and over 300 questions. It really was pretty intensive. But mainly it boils down to just the way that as a nurse, I think, nursing is all about the art and science of just taking care of others. And so, kind of having that holistic vision and not just looking at the science of it, but also looking at the art side, which to me means looking at the whole picture and like how things can affect somebody. And I'm a psychiatric nurse practitioner, board certified first. So I apply it mainly to mental health and well-being is how I think of myself as the holistic nurse practitioner at this point.
hmm
Cool.
I love that. I mean, I consider myself to be a holistic therapist,
Yes,
and so it's like you're not just like focusing on, okay, here's the mental health disorder, right? It's like, let's look at this whole person, their whole experiences, mind, body, soul. Like,
exactly. And that's exactly it. I mean, it's not just the mental health, it's also the medical side of things. I really look at their conditions medically and see how that kind of comes into everything. But also spiritually, you do see like a lot of people are lacking that spiritual connection when you ask that question of if anything, matters spiritually, religiously, culturally to them. Some people often in mental health will say no, and that does indicate to me that that is an area that we're lacking in connection to.
hmm that's
I mean,
awesome.
that stuff's really important to people. I mean, I don't know why people wouldn't realize it would be important in that part as well. Like, it affects every other part of your life.
It does, and when you're struggling in that area, then a lot of times you do see chronic illness, physical illness, as well as mental illness, and it just can kind of compound, I think, until maybe there is some sort of connection to spirituality of whatever that means to the person.
hmm Yeah, I feel like in the medical world, and you could probably speak to this much better than I can, but like your care is often very siloed. Like there's a doctor you go to for this, or you go to for, your eyes or whatever, which to some extent there has to be. But I really like that there's a trend. I mean, so far as like there's a board certification of like how do we integrate all of it?
Exactly. And I fully am behind integrative type of psychiatry and, pulling it into the medical profession. And it just all is connected. There's no way that we can separate it.
Yeah, that's awesome.
Yeah.
So tell us a little bit about you growing up and feeling like you had a strong intuition, or you said like a connection to something larger.
Oh, yeah. So I feel like just from a very young age, I just felt like there was just something bigger than what we are. I grew up going, not initially probably going to church and Sunday school, but then started to go to Sunday school and church with My mom started bringing us there, and that was a big part of our lives, was growing up in the church. But I just always felt like it was a little bit bigger than that. It was a small rural community, rural church. It was a lot about that social interaction that I think was what helped me to feel good about being connected and going there. And again, at the connection, I think often we're missing connection. So that was growing up, in the 80s and then into the 90s. And so I was born in the 70s, so that kind of throws you into the time frame that I'm talking about. And so a lot of families, a lot of family things, a lot of, before social media and a lot of electronics were big. So we would have church suppers, we would have potlucks, a lot of connection that way. But I just always felt like, again, something bigger, something that I could sense. I had this sense of knowing certain things, and I always felt like it was odd that I could sense something was going to happen or something that right before it happened, and it would throw me off balance a lot of times and kind of make me question myself in many ways. I just would almost like have a vision of something happening. I don't mean to say that I would literally see things, except I do remember as a child, like having things like that I would see. Um, Not that they meant much, but it wasn't like imaginary play. It was just like they were visions that I would see. So as I've gotten older, I have recognized by talking with some family that there's others in my family that have those similar things about them and generally have been pulled towards the helping or service type professions as well. Um, and we did realize that there was a connection in our family to some African American heritage with someone that had my great grandfather had been brought from Africa, and my great aunt, his daughter, was a folk teller and had a lot of intuition about things as well. And so just knowing all of that, I just feel like there is some sort of generational connection with all of that. I know it might sound odd and I still kind of question it, but I'm starting to learn how to lean into it a little bit more and kind of accept it, like when I sense that something is going to happen or that I should be doing something, to go a little bit more with that gut instinct. Like I know the phone's going to ring sometimes before it rings and who it's going to be. And, and that it's, little subtle things like that more nowadays, but there's always been this connection to something bigger out there. Now I think of it more as like a connection to the universe or energy.
Mhm. That that's interesting too, that this started in your childhood and has carried over, because we hear a lot of stories about kids being very kind of like psychically in tuned, or seeing things and stuff like that, and then as they get older, like that window closes. Was there ever a period of time where it was a little bit duller for you?
I think so. I think I blocked it out, thinking that there was something wrong with me for a long time and tried to suppress it. Um, just thinking that maybe I was crazy or that something, was just off. And so in my late 20s, early 30s, I kind of went through a little bit of what some people might have called a nervous breakdown. It was right after my son was born. He was a couple of years old at that point, so not directly after. But I did go through my own mental health crisis during that time for a few years. And I feel like in some ways things were more open during that time, but it was like this back and forth push and pull of, do I believe that this is what's happening to me? Or um and I felt like it just meant that my mental health was declining, that and all of the the providers, the doctors, most of the people that I met with, I'm not going to say all, I shouldn't say all, but most of them discounted a lot of what I was trying to tell them about what I was feeling and seeing in my mind. And it just kept making me feel like I was really not well. And I fell into the like what they were telling me was that I wasn't well. And I fell into thinking that I was a diagnosis or a label and that this was who I was and always was going to be. And they labeled me as permanently disabled during that time and kind of pushed Social Security disability on me as being permanently disabled. And this was something I didn't really want. I worked in a museum at the time. I really enjoyed my career in museum type of exhibits and working with curatorial and collections management and conservation. It was really a cool career. And I just couldn't get my mind straight. And the only one there that was really supporting me through a lot of that was my mom. We really connected during that time. She was there for me the whole time. She could tell when I was declining, when I was doing better. She was my advocate during all of these hospitalizations I had. I had a lot of ECT or electroconvulsive therapy and a lot of the medicine too. And a lot of that dulled who I was and what I thought in the world. And it just dulled my personality, but as well as like my goals and my dreams. And so that was a big changing point in my life once I kind of overcame some of that.
Thank you so much for sharing that story with us. As, you know, a nurse practitioner now in the mental health field, have there been patients that you've worked with where it was kind of difficult to see the the line between like mental illness and potentially something else like psychic happening? Have you experienced that?
Oh my goodness, yeah, that's a good question. Where I experienced that probably the most was when I worked on an inpatient psychiatric unit. My whole experience with mental health led me to want to do more and give back. And I was trying to do that in like a way of advocating for mental health. But then I ended up going back to school for nursing. I didn't really even think of being a mental health nurse, but then realized I could be. So I went back to school in a fast track program, evening and weekends, while my son was in fourth grade at that time. So a little bit of time had passed, and I had been on disability during that time. Worked a little bit as a part-time at a local historical society and was able to use this program Social Security has called Ticket to Work, and was kind of able to get back into the workforce, go back to school. They didn't make it an easy process. Getting off disability isn't easy, but I did go back for nursing and I was able to start as an RN and get off disability and give back to mental health. So now coming to your question, like I was on an inpatient psychiatric unit as a nurse, not as a patient. And that was an interesting kind of dichotomy in some ways where I had been the patient and now I'm, the helper. I'm the one that's the helping the doctors and I'm helping the patients and but I'm still behind a closed door, a locked door, a locked unit. So there are a lot of different things going along with that. But that's where I would see patients where I was just like, wow, like you would listen to stories that some other staff might think were completely bizarre or didn't make sense, or, people would dismiss somebody as being manic or schizophrenic or this or that, or that they had borderline personality disorder and they were seeking attention or all these different things. But if you actually took the time to listen to the patients that we had on the unit, and many of them were there as recurring patients. You know, they would come back quite often. Some of them would be there for a long time until they found placement somewhere else because maybe where they lived, they couldn't go back. Or maybe they needed a higher level of care at a different hospital. So sometimes we had people with us for a long time, even, you know, a while before they would stabilize sometimes too, that would happen. But there's usually, if you sat and listened to somebody, there was a common thread to what they were saying, that even if it didn't make sense to just kind of randomly listen to it, there'd be some sort of thread that would weave it all together and make sense, almost like a tapestry. And it often would have to do with a higher level of thinking, I felt like. And sometimes it was their past that was coming through, and they were almost reliving their past in some way. But I do remember one person who had some experience in carpentry and just did this amazing, I don't even know, like all these different calculations on the whiteboard. And it hit me at that point that someone experiencing some of these severe mental illness diagnoses was actually probably operating at such a high level of thought that we couldn't even comprehend it. So then it became quote unquote crazy to us who are living on this, you know, level playing field here on Earth. And I just began to kind of like wonder like what that was about. And I still don't have an answer for it, but often it just seemed like those who were in some sort of acute type of mental illness or diagnosis thing on the inpatient unit were just experiencing some sort of higher level of thought process, if that makes sense.
Yeah,
It
and
does.
your experiences gave you the context to actually listen to them enough to figure that out. I
Yes.
mean, there are a lot of people who end up in those types of situations strictly off of, the socioeconomic stratus.
Mm-hmm.
You know,
Yeah,
I mean,
for
if
sure.
you're rich, you might be David Lynch, and then if you're not, you might end up in one of your wards. And
Yeah.
where that's not my original thought. Some another podcast I listened to called Vase makes that analogy quite a lot. Is people who are these, what we consider to be these great artists, a lot of them come from situations where there wasn't someone there to lock them up when they were having what would be considered a manic moment, and then people were around to see it as a poetic thing. But if
Right.
nobody's there for that context for you, then you might end up in a whole different place.
Yeah, exactly. And there's many other cultures where something like that is revered as
Hmm.
wisdom and,
Yeah.
you
For
know,
sure.
something, yeah. And, you know, here we might not do that. And I think your point on the socioeconomic status is right on point because as Brittany knows, this was in the area where we met and it was fairly rural and fairly poverty stricken,
Yeah.
and a lot of people in a disadvantaged state economically, and then therefore a lot of people with mental health diagnoses that were just there as well.
Yeah. And I think about myself with this because I mean, I've shared this openly with people before, but like I channel spiritual messages,
Mm-hmm.
so it's like I literally am having downloaded messages where it's like it doesn't feel like it's coming from me, you know what I mean? And some people could perceive, I mean, I think I present as a pretty normal person, you know what I mean? But like some people could perceive that as crazy, as like I'm having, hallucinations or whatever,
Right.
and how often is that happening to other people who maybe they have more trauma than I do, or who, don't have as stable of a mental health, and so it just all looks like quote unquote, you know, I'm just gonna say it crazy, like that's
Mm-hmm.
what society calls us crazy, whereas like maybe there's like more layers to this. And so again, I love your approach of like holistic. Let's look at this whole person and really dig into what's going on instead of just looking at the textbook these are the DSM,
Mm.
criteria for this diagnosis. And so that's the only thing I'm taking into consideration.
Yeah, and that's exactly it. Like the DSM can be helpful to a certain extent as a
Yeah.
guide, but I feel like it boils down to a label, and
Yeah.
I'm so against labeling people because more often than not, someone has many layers. It's not just like, one diagnosis. And how can we say sometimes that it's a disorder when it could be beneficial to some people? It
Yeah.
doesn't necessarily have to be a negative. There's some things that are in that DSM that could be a positive as
Right.
yeah.
I totally agree with that.
Yeah. That's the therapist.
Yeah.
Hmm.
Absolutely. Going back to what you were talking about earlier of like there was a period of time that you did shut it down, that you felt like kind of these feelings that you were having that they were wrong. Where did that feeling of wrongness come from? Can you remember?
I can't specifically remember other than just probably society in general of, like that's not normal, quote unquote normal, to feel that way, to be connected to others in a way that like maybe you feel connected even if you're not in the same space as them, or you feel other people's energy when they even enter the room, whether you know them or not. And sometimes when you are someone that does feel those things and you're kind of sensitive to other people's emotions, or even feeling like sensitive to their thoughts or whatever, it can be overwhelming after a while. I think it's very tiring if you don't understand what might be happening at that time. And that's where probably being in my teens and 20s and maybe early 30s, it just was not understanding what any of that was. Um, and then as you get older, maybe gaining some wisdom about, or some confidence in like that this could be real and it doesn't necessarily have to be made up, or you're not lying about it, like I just think society in general isn't very accepting to those type of connections or intuition or whatever people want to call it.
Hmm.
But it's there, and it's there for a lot of people. It's just, I like you said, children feel it, I think, and you can see it in children all the time. But society tends to make us shut it down.
Hmm.
And so if it gets shut down enough, then it's gone.
Yep.
And maybe it's harder to find it again. Yeah.
You're definitely right on like feeling all of that, feeling the thoughts of other people or the emotions of other people and the energy of other people. Like it can be very overwhelming. And if you don't have like a way of understanding it, I went through this before I heard the word empath and figured out what that meant. I thought I
Right.
was crazy, like I thought there was something seriously wrong with me. And then I had a friend be like, "You're an empath." Like,
Mhm.
what does
Yeah,
that mean?
I know. And I think it was a therapist at one point, can't even pinpoint exactly, but that had led me to, um, the highly sensitive person and
Hmm.
empath. And, so then I started to understand because I could relate to that so much.
Yeah,
Yeah.
definitely. And I love what you said of like, you noticed this in your family. And I think you're right. Like, there's a connection between highly sensitive people and helpers, you know?
For sure. Yes. And I try to like kind of say that to, my fellow nurse colleagues and things like that. Like, there's a reason you went into this, and it's probably, those that are really, really compassionate and caring, and that it leads to burnout sometimes. So
Yeah,
I think that's why we have to hold each other up a little bit.
yeah,
Yeah. Yeah.
absolutely. So you have a beautiful story about your mom. Can you tell us that?
Yeah, that. again, is one of those areas with a little self-doubt and like, what is this? But I thought I'd reach out and kind of, see if there was any interest in it for your podcast. But so this was almost 7 years ago now, and I can hopefully, at this point I'm able to talk to about it a little bit better without, getting too overly emotional. But my mom, like I said, was really close to me. I think we were close all along. Like I used to worry as a child that she wouldn't be around, and I would get really upset if she had a meeting or something in the evening. So I always felt very connected to my mom. And then, of course, went out on my own and, had that independence, and I wasn't, talking to her all the time or whatnot. But then when I had my mental health experience, she was like right there and all the time. And we were talking pretty much, she would call to check up on me every day, or I would call her to let her know how I was doing. And if I didn't, then she'd be on the phone. So we became really connected during that time. And she became my best friend, really, at that point. I mean, she was more than my mom. She really was my best friend. And I lived in New York and she lived in Vermont where I grew up. So we weren't real like close like land wise. We weren't that close to each other. So it's not like I could just, go out to dinner with her, have lunch or coffee or go over to her house or anything. So we always had to make plans to meet up and see each other. A lot of times it would be over the summer, the spring, fall time, because the winter in the Northeast can be a beast. So we we wouldn't make many plans in the winter because of bad weather could kind of thwart that. So we would a lot of times do camping trips, and we would go to Maine, and we had a lot of things that we would do growing up. With my son growing up, and so that he could be around family and whatnot. She'd come out and visit in New York too. She'd kind of surprised me with bringing different family members, my grandmother, my cousin. It was always like this thing of who was going to come, and she'd come out for like Thanksgiving and things like that. So we were really close, I guess, is my point. And but around the fall of 2016, I was in the middle of changing jobs, and I think I was kind of distracted with that. So I know we weren't talking like every single day like we had been, but we still were, talking quite frequently. And I think she was having some health issues that I was kind of not recognizing. She wasn't really telling me about these things. My mom was very secretive, and so sometimes she wouldn't reveal the issues she was dealing with herself. And I know she was having a knee problem. Like since, afterwards I was finding out more things. She's having a problem with walking or mobility because of a knee problem. And then so she was over at my brother's house, which is about 30 to 40 minutes from her house and in the town where she worked. So she kind of had spent the night there for a few nights, and kind of saying it was because of the road conditions and weather. This was in December. And so one of my brothers called me and said, well, mom's not feeling good. She said that we weren't supposed to, like my brother that she was staying with wasn't supposed to tell me that she wasn't feeling good. So he was calling me instead to tell me that she wasn't feeling good and wasn't doing well. So I called her, and she answered her cell phone and said, they didn't tell you, did they? And I said, no, nobody told me anything. What's going on, right? And she was kind of upset that she knew that I had been told that she wasn't feeling well. So I think in just some ways, she still thought of me as kind of fragile with that mental health state. And she kind of tried to protect me sometimes from that. But I was stronger at that point. I was working as a nurse practitioner. I'd seen a lot at that point. So I was kind of like going over some of the symptoms she was having. It sounded like she had kind of like the flu or something like that. She couldn't keep anything down. And then she kind of started feeling kind of nauseous, I guess, and said, well, I've got to go. I can't stay on the phone. I got to go. So I said, okay, I'm going to call you in the morning. If you're still not feeling good, we've got to get you to the doctor. she was very averse to going to the doctor for anything. So this kind of leads to, she had been having a hernia for quite a while, and we had been begging her, pleading for her to go and get it taken care of, and she hadn't. So I didn't think much of that at that time, but that leads to what happened was, so I went to bed, and everything was, I think it was a Sunday night, if I remember right. So it's going to be a Monday morning. Woke up. I woke up in the middle of the night. It's right like around 3:30 in the morning. So, kind of a typical time for me to wake up. I tend to wake up a lot of times between 3 and 4. I think some people do. But I was in a panic, and my husband was up because the roads were bad and he was going to go to work early. And I was just panicked. I'm like, there's something wrong with my mom. I think she's having a heart attack. I need to call my brother and let him know, and so he can get her to the hospital. And I was just kind of frantic. And so my husband was like, she's okay. You're okay. Everything's okay. Just go back to bed and, call her in the morning, type of thing, because who calls at 3:30 in the morning to say, I think you're having a heart attack. You need to go to the hospital, when I'm in New York and she's in Vermont. And so I did go back to bed thinking, oh, I must be crazy, like I don't know where the strong feeling is coming from. So I went back to bed, but I was drifting in and out of sleep, and um just was, I mean, I was asleep, but I was kind of half asleep, that half asleep feeling. And during that time, I felt like I could hear my mom's voice. I mean, I knew logically she wasn't there. I wasn't hallucinating or anything, but I could hear her voice kind of, maybe even not externally, but maybe more internally, just saying, I'm okay. You're okay. Everything's going to be okay. I'll always be with you. Just kind of all these comforting type of things. And it just kept going over of, I will always be with you. I will always be with you, and you're going to be okay. Just kept repeating itself through all of these things. And then in one of like a more dream state that I was in, I had like this dream or vision of standing in a room that was light and bright and like yellow, white light type of thing. And I was holding a tea mug, and so it was warm and comforting. And I didn't know where I was. And I looked out the window in this dream, and I realized I was in my childhood home where my mom lived. And even though she wasn't staying there that night. And I looked out and saw the yard, and I was like, oh, I'm there, but it looked different inside. And then I woke up again, and I just had this unsettled feeling. I got up, I got ready for work, and then went and looked on my phone, and my my aunt had called or left a message. I think she had written it. I think it was more of a text instead of a voicemail. Maybe it was both. And she said to give her a call. And I called her, and thinking this isn't right. She shouldn't be sending me a message at 6:30 in the morning. And she said that my mom had been taken unresponsive by ambulance to the hospital, and that I should still go to work and they would let me know. And what was going on. And I'm like, I'm not going to work because the building I was working in at that time didn't have really good reception and didn't really have a good phone line either to be connected with. So I tried to get in touch with my husband and my son to get them both home from school and from work, and saying that we needed to go to Vermont right away. So I was in my mind at that point, I'm hoping I'm going to get there, before in time, and that I wasn't really thinking anything bad. She's my mom. She's going to survive anything. But it did turn out I was on the phone with my cousin, who happened to be out of the country at the time, and was like trying to comfort me while I was waiting for my son and husband to get home. And all of a sudden I said to her, I was like, I just could tell, like a doctor said she didn't make it. I'm sorry, she's not with us anymore. I'm like, she's gone. I said to my cousin, she's gone. And so it turns out that she had passed out at 3:30 in the morning in the bathroom at my brother's house, and they had gotten her up and brought her to a chair where she had been in and out of sleep or consciousness, I think. And 3:30 was when I had woken up in a panic. Um, and then I just wonder, like, if she was in and out of sleep, if it was consciousness, and that during that time is when she was able to communicate to me, even across that 6 hour travel time frame, like however many miles that was from New York to Vermont. So that's a really long way of like kind of telling the story, but that's basically what it was. And ever since then I've just wondered about how energy, like the energy of our body leaves our body when we're ready to leave this earth and transition into the next step of whatever is out there. Um, I just feel like that energy somehow like goes towards the sun, and then the sun is help is like the energy of everybody, and it helps to replenish us and keep us alive while we're here. And then hopefully someday our energy joins with each other, or it just transitions into something else. Um, Kind of what I think now in some ways.
I mean, I have chills just listening to you share that story. It is truly incredible. When you kind of, you know, after the fact and able to put the pieces together of like I woke up in the panic at 3:30 as she was going through that, like how did you feel?
I was in shock because I didn't realize that until we found out that she was gone before we ended up hitting the road to drive there. So I knew the whole way driving there that she was gone, and I was just devastated. Like I was in shock.
Hmm.
And but then when we got there and to my brother's and we were met by family, extended family, a lot of people were there. Um, it was a little bit later on that the whole thing about finding out of her passing out at 3:30 in the bathroom, and I hadn't made that connection yet. That came later on. And I just was like, oh my gosh. And I kept it to myself. I mean, and I think I talked to my husband about it because he witnessed me being in a panic, but I didn't want to bring that forth to anyone else initially, like, because I mean, they might think I'm crazy, right? Um, so I kind of kept that to myself, but initially I was just in shock by it. I just couldn't believe that maybe there was a way that she had connected to me because I wasn't there. Um, and knowing that her concern about like my mental health history, and that she wouldn't want me to kind of go backwards into that again, and knowing that losing her could have maybe sent me backwards, that she would have probably, if she could reach out, she would have reached out
Hmm.
to help me through that. Yeah.
Did it ever shift into a place of feeling comforted by the messages she sent?
It did, because then it became a little bit, there were other messages kind of after that, like, and this is probably when I realized it was most comforting, was that following June. So that was in December, and so it was like 6 months later in June. Um, it's kind of funny. My son, not funny, but interesting. My son and my niece are very close in age, and they both were graduating from high school that year, and in 2017. And my mom was torn because we had realized that their graduation was, I think his was in like the afternoon, and hers was the evening before. So it was going to be really difficult to make both graduations and for both of her grandchildren. And so because of everything that had transpired over, the previous 6 months, my family made a really big effort to all come out for my son's graduation. And after my niece had graduated. So like there was a flood of family that came out, and we had rented a house on Lake Ontario so that we could house them all, and that we could have like a little graduation party for both of them there. And so what was interesting, oh, and then my niece was having a graduation party at her home, like I think a week later. And so when we were, rainbows were a thing with my mom, and she would take pictures of rainbows, and she saw rainbows all the time, more than a typical person does. And she would always snap pictures of them, even before iPhones. And so on the day of my son's graduation party, there was a big rainbow across Lake Ontario, and I thought that was so special. But it was even more special when I went to my niece's graduation party the week after at my brother's house, and there was a rainbow at her graduation party.
That's
And
cool.
yeah, I was like, my mom figured out a way to be at both of their ceremonies and their graduations regardless. And that
Oh,
brought such a sense of comfort. Yeah.
yeah. Oh, that's beautiful.
Yeah, I think so. But then there's still some people that thought that I was running out, and I'm like, there's another rainbow. My youngest brother thought I was a little bit crazy, but I don't know. Yeah. I
Not
just,
crazy at all.
yeah, it was her way. And there are just different moments that there's been rainbows, and I don't feel it as much anymore. And I maybe because I'm just in a better space and she doesn't think I need that. But during times of needing it, she's been there with different signs. Yeah.
Hmm. Yeah. And I mean, I've had that experience before too, where you're seeing something like that would be somebody would consider just normal.
Mhm.
And but like you have that internal gut feeling where you're like again, the chills, like for you, that's a sign from mom. She's
Yeah,
letting us know she's
exactly.
here with us.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And so that does bring me comfort now. It's been, quite a few years of getting to that, but I think so, when we can kind of work through that grief process, that sometimes we can find that peace. Yeah.
Yep, absolutely.
Yeah.
How would you say this has influenced your beliefs?
It's influenced them very strongly just because, like the whole grief process, anger was a big one for me during that.
Hmm.
And a lot of anger towards um, religion, just to kind of put it out there like that. Having grown up in a fairly religious place, having used religion a lot to get through my mental health struggle, then I just felt very left, and like I just was done with that. I had also lost my dad at a young age, and he died on Christmas Eve, and my mom died on December 19th. So like different years, but the same week of each other.
Yeah.
And yeah, so I felt like, oh wow, this is just, and the same time frame that my son was going to be graduating and moving on. And it was a really, really hard time to just accept that, well, this is the way life is, the new normal. Um, so I really kind of turned my back a lot on my faith and religion, but I feel like I've picked up a stronger spirituality that's more connected to something even larger. Like I feel like it's the universe, that it's, or whatever we want to call it, but there's a huge network of interconnectedness there. And I feel like it's more about energy at this point. And your book, Brittany, kind of spoke to that to me when I was reading it the other day. Um, like some theories about quantum physics and things like that that I've looked into. I have a lot more research to do, but um,
So do the quantum physicists.
Yeah.
yeah,
They sure
exactly,
do.
right? Exactly, right? Yeah, so I mean that is where my belief system
Mhm.
and that's how it influenced my beliefs. Yeah, like I think we're all looking for something larger and it just means something different to each person.
Mhm.
And that's perfectly fine if it's a certain religion or
Yeah.
something to anyone. But what I believe is perfectly fine too, and it doesn't fit into a box at this point. And maybe it will. I mean, at some point, I lean a little one way or another, but um, yeah, that's kind of where it influenced my beliefs. I feel like
Mhm.
I'm where I'm supposed to be with that. Yeah.
Yeah, and I mean, I think you're right in terms of like everybody's spiritual beliefs or religious beliefs. It's like whatever, as long to me, as long as you're not causing harm to anybody else, like it's perfectly fine. But I love what you're sharing about you came from a very kind of structured religious background to now it's more of like it just sounds to me more expansive and it's really like instead of just going along with the stories I've been told by other people, I'm forging my own path with what resonates and feels right for me.
Yeah, exactly. And feel like, just on a daily basis, trying to give back and live the best life I can. Is it perfect every day? No, no, no. Like, am I, full of, like positivity all the time? No, not at all. And I don't think that's healthy either. I think you
Yeah.
mentioned that in your book too, and that's been an interesting area for me to explore is the toxic positivity.
Hmm.
Like it's just, we can't be perfectly happy all the time. And I think coming to a place of acceptance. So I think where I'm laying more in my beliefs would be more like in the area of radical acceptance and trying to just be who you are, where you're at, and just trying to be the best person that you can be.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Radical acceptance is so hard, but so beneficial, where you can just, you don't have to like exactly how everything is, but it's like not fighting against the circumstances of your life.
Yeah, exactly. Because I look back at my mental health struggle and I think I was just fighting against everything or thinking I knew what things should be or that other people knew what things should be. And when I kind of let it just fall into place where it's supposed to be, it works out so much better than fighting
Mhm.
against it.
Yeah,
Yeah.
Yeah, it makes
powerful.
a lot of sense. And I think that something you said a few minutes ago, kind of a demarcation between religion and spirituality. Very rarely do those two things really have anything to do with one another.
Hmm.
Generally, a religion is a structure of belief with rules, and generally, what people often consider or call spirituality is just how you experience life, and those are very, very different things.
Yes, for sure. And that's where I think the spirituality tends to be missing a lot of times for people, even regardless of, you know, the religion aspect of it.
Hmm.
Yeah, the spirituality to me is the connection. Yeah, I mean, I hope that all makes sense. Sometimes I feel silly talking about it.
No, it makes complete sense. And I'm very glad that you reached out and shared the story because, like I said, I personally think it's a beautiful story. I'm sorry that it had to happen because your mother was passing, but I mean, you've talked so much tonight about connection and just hearing the story of connection between you and your mom during one of the most difficult periods of your life. It's incredible. So I'm very, very thankful that you reached out to us and that you were willing to talk so openly about not just this experience, but your experience with your mental health.
Yeah, well, thank you for offering the time to do that. And I mean, a lot of that was like Brittany, when I knew you, when we worked together, a lot of that was things I was going through. And I think a lot of it came out in some physical, like I
Mhm.
said, everything's kind of connected. And for myself
Yeah.
personally, I had a lot of physical stuff going on at that time. And, there's other explanations. I had Lyme disease, I was bit by a tick and, whatever.
Yeah.
It was just, it went on for a few years of like just kind of almost being physically unable to do a lot of things. And I think again, once I started to kind of come around to acceptance, that a lot of that started to kind of lift and, physically became better. I still have a long way to go to being healthy, but I just, a lot of those physical symptoms started to improve,
Mhm.
the somatic type of things. Yeah.
I remember on the questions that you sent us, the thing I loved the most was you said that I think you had just turned 50, but you still feel like you're 30 to 40, which I love, by the way. But do you feel like that plays a role in it? Is like your health has improved and so like you have more energy, or what is it?
Yeah, I think that's a lot of it. I mean, I just think my mind hasn't advanced to catch up to how old I am. But and I just feel like there's still so much to do in life. There's so many
Yeah.
things that are still out there that I want to experience. And since moving, I think sometimes there was just that energy of things that had happened were kind of in my being in my household. And so like kind of relocating to a new place and a new environment really helped a lot as well.
Yeah.
Yeah.
New
Yeah.
working environment, which seems like it's very positive for you. Yeah.
Yeah, right now I'm in a very, very good place that has very good work-life balance, and they support those of us that work there. It's in a university type of environment. It's just amazing. I'm very, very grateful for that.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
I'm very happy to hear that.
Yeah, I tell you, college, university counseling centers is where it's at.
I have heard that before. Those are hard jobs to come by as a therapist at least, but
I know we have a couple of openings right now just because some people left due to relocating
yeah.
and I'm hoping that people will come in. But I had worked at SUNY Oswego and SUNY Upstate Counseling Services and just loved it at both of those places.
Hmm.
Yeah. Yeah.
That's awesome.
Yeah. So hopefully if you want something like that, go for it. Because I don't think most people regret it in the end. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, it's so good to
Awesome.
see you tonight.
It was very good to see you and to talk to you. And I just, again, am so appreciative that you shared these stories with us. So thank you.
Of course.
Take
Yeah.
care, Julie.
You take care too.
I
Bye.
will. Bye. Thank you so much for being here. If you have a strange story you want to share with us, email us at seekerandskeptic@gmail.com. We look forward to talking to you soon.